Hello, superheroes. Welcome to Season 2 of Superhero Academy's podcast, dissecting what it takes to be an everyday superhero. This week's guest is James Clear, one of the best bloggers out there. No joke, he is one of the only people who I've ever read a newsletter from that I actually enjoyed. We talk about an amazing array of topics, from productivity hacks to what is a good or bad habit and how do you cultivate that. So check out this week's podcast in the links somewhere over here. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe anything is possible? Now let me ask you it differently. Do you believe you can achieve anything? Do you see a disconnect between these two statements, even for a moment? Let me tell you how I crossed that gap in one simple yet life-changing step. A few years ago, while hiking the Great Wall of China, I accomplished a dream of mine I had written down in an old journal some years back. Walking that wall felt like a giant check mark in the scattered list of amazing things I have always wanted to achieve in my lifetime. What I realized in that moment was that I had a huge list in my mind, but I had no true action plan to making it my reality. And then it hit me. The simple step to achieving my dreams was that I needed to make the list of my dreams a conscious reality. In that moment of clarity, I sat down and wrote what I now call the impossible list. What I wrote on the impossible list are the dreams I am committed to seeing through in my lifetime. What you write on your impossible list will be the accomplishments you're remembered for forever. Sometimes life feels like a journey, a race of sorts. But it's strange how many of us run the marathon of our lives without knowing where the finish line is, let alone where some of the checkpoints might be along the way. So the question is, what do you want to see come to life in your journey? I'm challenging you to take the initiative to see your deepest passions come true. So what impossible challenges will you tackle and make your reality? But now, without further ado, James Clear, an entrepreneur, a really good newsletter writer, an author or somebody who's writing a whole bunch of really interesting things, and somebody who I would consider an expert on habits, somebody who seems to just have a pulse on the truth of what it's like to be an entrepreneur, of the truth of what it's like to struggle to be an entrepreneur at times, and somebody who's taken beautiful pictures and some photography literally around the world. So you guys can learn more about him. All the links are in the description below, but jamesclear.com. James, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Mark, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm not going to lie, your newsletters are super exciting to me all the time. Like literally, I get newsletters like left, right, and center. I'm one of those guys that like, if I see somebody who's doing something kind of remotely interesting, I'll go and sign up to the newsletter, but I don't always open it, right? Like it depends on the title and how good the copy is and stuff. But when I get your newsletter, I always open it. I'm not even kidding you. And I always find it very, very, very eye-opening.
I'm sure my open rate is thankful for your dedication. It's great to hear that. You know, I've been writing every Monday and Thursday for the last 2+ years, and so to have people stick with me over that time and still find it interesting and useful and insightful, that's great for me to hear. Especially because, and this is something that I think all entrepreneurs can relate to in some aspect, you always judge your own work so hard, right? So like I'll send out a lot of stuff where I feel like, oh, it's average, it's not that great. So it's always good to hear that it speaks to, to people and they find it useful.
Absolutely. No, I totally find it super useful. Every time I've ever like dove into one of these newsletters, it's just blown my mind. And recently, actually, one of the newsletters I indulged in was this whole kind of segment that you had dealing with multitasking. And before we get to that, though, I do want to hear a little bit of your story. Like,
sure.
I mean, you've got an enormous amount of people who are reading the things that you're posting out every week now. But let's back up a second. Where did James become a superhero? Where did you start to unlock this? Where did this all kind of start to come out of you? What brought you and led you to be the entrepreneur that you are today?
Sure. So to provide a little bit of context for where we're at now, I have about 500,000 people a month who read my site, and my email list is about 130,000 or so. And I send emails to them every Monday and Thursday. But the process of getting there, I mean, I had to build a skill set first. And so this is kind of the path that I followed. Looking back, I didn't really, for a long time, I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur. I guess I just didn't use that word, but I was acting like it without really knowing it. So as one example, when I was an undergrad, I looked at all the majors. I had like 50 some majors or whatever at college that you could choose from. And I didn't see any that I liked. So I went ahead and designed my own and then proposed it to the Academic Affairs Council. And they said yes. And those are the classes that I took when I was in college. And so like looking back, that's a relatively entrepreneurial thing to do, to like look at the options and be like, I don't like any of these. Let me create one.
Pave your path. Yeah, no doubt. That's definitely entrepreneurial.
So anyway, after I got done with undergrad, I went to grad school. And I had a couple of touch points with health and wellness, which we'll come back to in a minute. So I was an athlete. I played baseball all the way through undergrad. I worked at a medical practice in between my first and second year of grad school, so in sports medicine. And then I was a biomechanics major, so I was a science guy. I was studying mostly chemistry and physics. So I had this health side of things. And then on the other side, I was in grad school for business. I was getting my MBA, and my job was to analyze venture capital investment in the region. So for my graduate assistantship. And so I was looking at all these guys rolling out companies, all these new companies starting. And that was where I kind of got the itch myself. I was like, well, if they're all doing it, maybe I could try it as well. So I graduated. I tried my first idea. This was about 4.5 years ago at this point.
Okay.
Totally flopped. It was an iPhone app. It was just a terrible idea. It was like a little picture app and stuff. But the reason it didn't work, it's not even available anymore, but the reason it didn't work is because I had no one to launch it to. I had no platform. I had no one I just figured, if we build the app and put it on iTunes, iTunes will do the rest. Yeah. Build it, they will come, right?
Yeah.
And then once I had that little failure, I ended up losing, I think, about $1,400 on it, just between development and stuff, because I didn't know how to program. And so anyway, I had that little flop, and I was like, all right, I need to figure out why people sign up for things. Why would someone join an email list? Why would someone buy a product? Why would someone pay attention to something? And that was when I started studying the psychology piece. So I started with consumer psychology and direct response copywriting and all that stuff. And because I realized that the problem was that I didn't have an audience, I started writing as well. Now, at the time, I was only writing once every month or so whenever I felt motivated and inspired. But anyway, over those next 2 years, the first 18 months to 2 years of me being an entrepreneur, I really dove deep in that psychology piece. During that time, I was building my skill set. So I learned how to build an email list. I learned how to start a website. I taught myself how to program, stuff like that. Okay, so I spent this whole time incubating a skill set. But I also, the more I studied those psychology pieces, the more that health piece, my background, started coming into the forefront. And I would read something about building habits in customers, and I would say, hey, I could probably use this to build better habits going to the gym, or to improve my nutritional habits at home, or to get myself to write more consistently.
Wow.
And that was when I started to see the connection between all those psychology pieces I was studying for business and all the health and fitness stuff that I was interested in personally. And I started writing about that for about a year in private. And
what do you mean by in private? You were just writing it and not kind of putting it out, really?
Yeah. I had a private document. It was just like a Word document, and it ended up getting to be like 60 pages long. And I wrote just about all these things I was learning about building habits and so on. And eventually I was like, this is ridiculous. I just need to put something out there. And I knew that that was what I really wanted to do. But I just had to step up. And so November 12th, 2012 was the first day that I published on jamesclear.com. And then every Monday and Thursday since then. And and that consistency, and also the content and the ideas around habit formation and psychology, and this whole link between mastering your skill set and mastering your mind. That's what I write about, and it's resonated fairly well.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, you mentioned the word consistency, and I think consistency is not something to be overlooked or overglossed. Consistency is probably one of the hardest things ever to achieve, whether it be in business, whether it be in wellness, whether it be in any habit forming of any kind. It's maintaining that habit. that is so, so powerful. It
You know what's
literally
interesting?
is more
If I
powerful than
can,
anything else.
if I can just jump in on that.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
like, think about how many, there are a lot of things in the world that we don't have answers to.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many things that you as an individual haven't figured out, even if someone else has.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a lot of things that you know the solution to. Like, you know what to do, but you just don't
Don't
do it
do
that
it.
often.
Mm-hmm.
And that my argument would be, let's start with that stuff. Like, we spend so much time trying to figure out a better strategy or a better angle or a new, solution or technology to something. But you often don't need that stuff. If you just implement the solutions that you already know work, but that you don't do on a consistent basis, you're going to get incredible results without even needing to, I don't know, magically discover something new.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I totally agree. Consistency is a huge win. It's literally like the lowest hanging fruit because you already know what to do. It's just do it more often.
Exactly. No, you know what's crazy is that that's actually been my problem in many, many, many different cases. Is that I'm one of these people who has a lot of ideas. And then when you have a lot of ideas, what ends up happening when you have a lot of ideas is you want to chase them all. And you start running down all of them and you start multitasking and doing all that stuff. And again, we'll get to that. But what ends up really happening is that you're starting to build a following. You're starting to get people who sign up to your newsletter. You're starting to do all these things. But you're not serving these people because in your mind, you're always saying, how am I getting the next person? Right? It's like I never got out of the gear at times of how do I continue to grow the movement? How do I continue to grow what I'm doing? Versus more so, and what's proven 100 times over to be way more effective, which is just be consistent in what you do what you do all the time, very regularly, very consistently, and put it out there, and it will grow itself. And
Yeah.
and that thing, and it's so funny because, and I love what you said there, which is that we know the solution to these things, right? We know the solution to losing weight. We absolutely know it. We know the solution to, feeling better and being able to feel more comfortable in our body, right? We know in certain cases, we very clearly know some of those solutions. We very clearly know some of the solutions that it takes to be able to build a newsletter that's going to do well. And the only thing that is standing between us and that is the consistency of forming those true habits of where we actually do that. Where all we need to do is just show up when we were expected to show up.
I
And
totally
it's just
agree. I
insane.
mean, like you, and I wouldn't guarantee results in any way and say that, if you did what I did, you'll have 500,000 people reading your
Of
site each
course.
month. But that's basically what I think when I talk to someone, they say, oh, I'd like to build a popular website. I spend usually between 5 to 12 hours per post. That's usually about how much time I spend writing each article. So, and I write every Monday and every Thursday. So my argument would be spend 10 hours on each post, try your best, and post twice a week. Get back to me in 2 years. Like if you did that, then maybe you would be there. Like
I
I
don't
don't know.
even think maybe. I think you will be there. You will
Like
have written
the
so many
recipe-
things. You will have touched upon so many people's lives and so many different topics that I'm not to say that you're going to be there exactly. Like you said, you
Right.
can't guarantee the results and you can't guarantee every once in a while you have this one article you post
Maybe
out
it's
and it
not
gets
500,000. Maybe it's 100,000. Maybe it's whatever. But you're
Yeah.
gonna make progress. Like
Yes.
there's no.
and you will be able to earn a living if you're providing true value to people, right? And I say value, not products, not services, value. People will give you that value back. Now, it could be in the form of products and services and all these things, but it's not about that. It's about to be rich, you must enrich, right? To get riches, whatever you measure your riches in, whether it be dollars and cents or in social interactions or a big network black book or something like that. It doesn't matter. To be rich, you have to enrich. You have to give all the time, and by giving and doing something as simple as writing twice a week, it is incredible what you can do to kind of start affecting people's lives because you become that thing that they always do regularly. Like I literally said, I read your newsletter all the time, and it's because it's very consistent. It's just like that time of the week for me. It's like, oh, cool. I'm going to read this newsletter right now, and I'm going to digest, and I'm going to take a moment to step away from whatever I was doing. And most of the time, even in my approach of reading other people's stuff, what I've noticed is that you've also done something else really well. You kept it simple. if I visit your website, if I read what you're writing, if I even see the diagrams I know you hand draw and stuff, it's all very simple and easy and clean. And I think there's something to be said about that. I think there's something to be said about the fact that in the world of like an enormous amount of noise right now, right, where the internet is just like everything's a mile a minute, we're scrolling through news feeds like left, right, and center. Just everything is just happening so quickly. There's so much going on everywhere around the globe, and we hear about all of it. Simplicity is so, again, overlooked as to being part of that magic secret that's just like, hey, do what you do it simply, do it consistently, and that is the best marketing that money literally can almost not even buy at times.
Yeah, I would say one of my like underlying philosophies or principles, and this is true for website design, but it also filters into the business as a whole, is that I don't want you to have to do the work. So like I should do the work for you. So if someone looks at a hand-drawn image that I do that's in an article, it may on the surface they may say something like, "Oh, that's kind of basic," but simple and basic are very different because basic means there's not a lot of thought behind it, but simple actually in many cases has more thought behind it because I'll go through. Actually, I have I have these sitting right here on my desk. These are all different versions of images that I've drawn, like different drafts of recent ones. I'll go through, like 30 different drafts of an image just so that I can get to the distilled point that I'm trying to make and not have it be cluttered with other stuff. Like maybe I could draw a prettier image or a more complex one, but I don't want it to be complex. I want you to get the main point immediately.
Yeah.
And the web design is the same way, like I think good design is invisible because it's not about the design. If you're reading a site and you find yourself questioning the design or questioning why something's laid out a certain way or noticing different features, that's not the point. The point for me at least is to let you fall in love with the work and let the design like fade away. And at that point it just becomes about doing better work because there's no filter between you and the value or you and the content.
Exactly. There's no like pop up like a box or some crazy thing that's like really getting in your way or stopping you from being able to digest that content in the way that is just clear and easy. And I like what you said again there too, which is that it's not basic, it's simple. I was having this literal conversation last night with kind of a buddy. I had taught a class here. I have this blackboard behind me. Normally I had lights and cameras and stuff set up here. And what ended up kind of happening, he's like, man, you boiled it down to something that was so simple. And I said, well, simple things always work. It's like, why do quotes work, for example? Be the change you want to see in the world. And I literally was dancing along the fine line of how vagueness sometimes actually allows for more kind of people's unique situations or unique thoughts to fit into the example in and of itself. Right? So that simple diagram that you draw, that simple sentence that you can say, that is the sticking point or that is the title of your paragraph, that vagueness actually allows for more people to get behind it. I can't think of any
experience onto the quote.
Exactly. That you're projecting your own kind of idea of what that is into it. And if you think about that, if I think about all the most successful like campaigns ever, and I don't want to say campaigns in some form of even business. What about politicians? Let's think about Obama for a second. What was his word? What was his message? Hope, change. Change what? I don't know. Hope for what? I don't know. Whatever you wanted to follow that sentence, whatever you wanted to fit into that space, that was exactly what you saw in him or didn't see, right? You're either like, no, I absolutely have no hope in you. Or if you were like whatever, the Republican, or it's like, I have all the hope in you because you're the guy who we were waiting for kind of thing. It's so funny how that simplicity has really, really, really gone to a level of it's like it's rising more and more. The more noise that there is, the more that the simplicity is doing better. And I even like credit like companies like Apple and all these people who even design their products to look very simple. It's like there's a reason why these companies are doing well. And I feel like part of your message, in many different newsletters I've seen, you wrote at one point something about 1% better. You talked about multitasking. Maybe we'll dive into that right now. But being simple, not basic, but simple, and focusing on what you got to do and focusing and doing it well could be very, very powerful. And I want you to maybe touch upon some of these habits that we have today, like multitasking, and where do you feel that that's like just completely breaking down what we're doing and really actually destroying our quality of life, destroying our ability to actually get anything done properly?
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of science behind this. The main idea is it's actually, although it's possible to like do more than one thing at a time, for example, be on your phone, do a phone call while you're driving. Um, it's not possible for your brain biologically to focus on more than one thing at a time. So what actually is happening there is your brain is switching back very quickly back and forth. Like you say a sentence and then you check the road again. Then you say a sentence and you check the road. And it's all happening like almost instantaneously. So, but the other problem is where it really comes into play is when we talk about things that require deep work, like entrepreneurship or writing or, art of any form. Okay. And the reason that it's a problem is because task switching requires this kind of like startup time. It's like rebooting your computer whenever so you need like a little bit of time to get back into flow of doing the work. One example, there was a study published in 2003 where they found that the typical person checks email every 5 minutes. And on average, after reading an email, it takes 64 seconds to resume the previous task that you were doing. So let's say that you're writing an article and then you check your email. When you get back to the article, it takes about 64 seconds or it takes about a minute for you to get back into the flow of writing the article again, finding your place, getting your train of thought back, thinking about what your next point was going to be, and so on.
Wow.
So if you do check your email every 5 minutes, that means that sixth minute is wasted. So every 5 minutes, you're wasting another minute because you're switching back and forth. And that's the cost of multitasking, is that when you switch between one and the other, it's not that you can't do the task. It's that when you are trying to rotate between them, you have this constant buffer of time where you have to get back into flow for the next thing. And as a result, we end up wasting a lot of time. And so multitasking looks really busy because you're switching all over the place and doing a bunch of things, but it actually wastes a lot of time. Meanwhile, focusing on one task, like just writing for 25 minutes straight, looks fairly simple. It's like, oh, they haven't done a whole lot. They're only working on this one thing, but it actually gets results because you're not wasting all that time switching back and forth.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said also about the fact that not only you're wasting out 1 minute, but there's a certain amount of energy, let's say, that you have in your bank, right? And you have a certain amount of energy that's flowing through you on a daily basis, let's say. And in that energy bank, that 1 minute is a very it's a very charged minute, in the sense that it's requiring a lot of your kind of brain power to kind of constantly switch back and forth. Because if you're going to answer that email properly, you have to switch into it for a second. You have to get in the mind frame of who you're talking to, what they're asking you, respond to it very clearly. And then you have to get back to writing, let's say, that blog that you were working on. And that requires an enormous amount of energy, and it feels very tiring, right? And focusing on something, to me, is like next level. And I use a particular technique, and maybe I want to dive into some of the hacks that you might have, or maybe some tips that you might have for doing something like this. But I'm going to show you guys one of mine. So, not long ago, I got a hourglass. And I'm not going to lie, the first reason why I got the hourglass off Amazon.com was because I thought it would always be really cool to have an hourglass. Nothing more, nothing less. But when I actually got it, I was like, wow, this is really sweet. And I had no idea how long it actually lasted, even though it says an hourglass. I didn't know if it was actually an hour. And I decided not to know. And I decided to actually use this as like a token of my busyness. And like showing to other people, if somebody was around, that would bother me, or even just to myself, to shut off all the distractions and focus on what I call power hour. Take one task, flip the hourglass, and do only that task. And make sure for me, it's like shut Facebook, shut emails, tell people about this in my environment. So if a girlfriend walks in or something and she sees this, it's like, hey, please, respect this unless it's an emergency or whatever. So I use this pretty regularly, and I try and schedule one almost every day. Okay. And some days I do longer. And most of the time, to be honest, I don't even have to finish the hourglass before I'm done whatever I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a productivity hack that I use, but what are some of the habits that you form for yourself that make a lot of sense in this?
Okay, so I really like the hourglass. There are two things I want to say here. The first is, let's talk about, I'll come back to the hourglass in a second.
Sure.
First, let's talk about setting priorities for yourself. So there are two stories here. The first is that the word priority, which I talk about in my multitasking article, wasn't even around a couple hundred years ago. It started out as priority, not priorities. So there was only one most important thing that you could focus on. And it stayed singular for hundreds of years. And then it wasn't until the 1900s, when we became obsessed with scale and efficiency and getting more done, that we pluralized it to priorities. And now people start acting like, oh, I can have priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, this is discussed in a book called Essentialism by Grave McKeown. But I like that idea that priority is the thing. There's only one most important task. There are not multiple first things that you can do. So given that, I've developed a list, and I call these my anchor tasks, and you can do this for yourself as well. Each day, there's one anchor task. There's only one thing that has to get done that day. Now, I plan on getting much more done, right? Like you can have a long to-do list. I have probably 30 items on my to-do list, but most of those things are not going to be worked on until the anchor task is finished. And once the anchor task is finished, then you move into the next thing. So that's the first thing, is setting priorities for yourself. The second story about that is about Warren Buffett. And I've written about this as well. Buffett, this story came directly from Buffett's pilot, his name is Mike Flint. He was Warren Buffett's private pilot for about 10 years. He also flew Air Force One for a couple of U.S. presidents. Really, really great history as a pilot. He was talking to Buffett about his career and where he was going to go and what he wanted to do next. He told Warren to get a certain type of plane because he's like, I'd like to fly this plane in 5 years. And Warren was like, look, if you're still flying this and flying for me in 5 years, I probably have failed you. Like, you should move on to something else. He's like, so let's write down your top 25 goals for your career. Now, you can do the same exercise for any timeline. You can do it for 10 years. You can do it for the next month. You can do it for this week, whatever. But the same principle applies. So he said, write down your top 25 goals for your career. So he wrote them all down. Then he said, okay, I want you to circle your top 5. So he went off, took some time, circled the top 5. He was like, all right, now tell me your strategy for moving forward. And he said, okay, well, I have my top 5 priorities. So obviously I'm going to work on those first. And then this other list that I have, the remaining 20, those are things that will get like secondary focus. So when the main projects stall, I'll work on those. And Warren was like, no, you got it all wrong. What you need to do is those things that you circled, that's your focus list. That's what you work on at the expense of everything else. The items that you did not circle, items 6 through 25 on your list, those are your never do under any circumstance list. And the reason that I like this is because the way that we distract ourselves often, especially if you're an entrepreneur or someone who's fairly effective, is not with things that are a huge waste of time, but with things that you can justify doing, but that aren't the biggest win for you. They're not areas where you should be spending your time, but you can easily justify it. It's like, oh, well, this is tangentially related, or this is kind of important, so I'm not wasting my time here. So it's all those items that are numbers 6 through 25 in your list that suck the energy out of your day and prevent you from getting that anchor task or that priority thing done. Wow. So that's the first piece of pick your anchor tasks, decide what your main priority is for the day.
That is great.
The
that is
second,
brilliant.
And this has to do with your hourglass. So this is the reason I like it. I find that we often respond very well when it comes to building habits to visual cues. So here's another story of a strategy that works well. Jerry Seinfeld, very popular comedian, one of the most famous comedians, successful comedians of all time. Early in his career, before Seinfeld was a super popular show, he was on the road as a comedian, and there was a young comic named Brad Isaac who was opening at the club that night. Isaac caught Seinfeld backstage and he said, hey, do you have any tips for a young comic? Do you have anything that you think I should do? And Seinfeld said, well, the secret to being a great comic is to write better jokes. And the secret to writing better jokes is to write every day. So what I want you to do is get a big wall calendar where you can see every day of the year mapped out on it. And each day that you do your task of writing jokes for 10 or 15 minutes, put an X on that day. And he's like, you may have a couple false starts, but eventually, after you do this for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, you're going to start to get a little bit of a chain going. And at this point, your only job is don't break the chain. It doesn't matter how good or how bad your jokes are. It doesn't matter how you feel about them. It doesn't matter if they make it into your material. It's just don't break the chain. And that visual cue of being able to see the fact that you did the work, similar to having that visual cue of the hourglass, and being able to flip it over. I think that helps drive us because it provides a constant reminder or a trigger to stay on path and to continue that consistency. So I think those are probably two of the consistency is a big topic, but those are probably two of the most essential pieces. Let me select my priorities. So make the hard decision of committing to one thing,
which is
and choosing what you're going to focus on. And then after you've made that decision, don't break the chain.
Yeah, so to the people listening, you guys are coming from all walks of life, right? Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're part of a movement, whether you're an activist, whether you're doing anything in the world, what I think is being said here, and I think we'll both very much agree on this, is be consistent with 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 5 if you have to go with the Warren Buffett, technique, but not more than that. Don't, as an activist, let's say, don't try and tackle 25 different problems. Try and tackle 1 or 2. Try and go and be really well known for having done that thing. And as you gain kind of notoriety, as you gain a following, or as you gain people who support you, you're going to be able to do that much more possibly later. Because once you're done a particular task, you can possibly move to the next one eventually, right? And you can possibly say, okay, look, I've really done number 1. Can I move to number 6 now? I don't think that would be a problem for me. But the truth is that at the same time, you got to make sure that you're staying focused. And I think that it makes a lot of sense to also do it in a very visual, offline kind of way, because where you work is going to affect you too. Like even your physical environment, right? Like if you're working at a desk and there's papers everywhere and there's a whole bunch of stuff all over, and you have a whole bunch of tabs open on your laptop, well, guess what? You're going to feel really stressed out and you're going to feel like there's too much going on. And that happened to me. I'm not going to lie. This exact kind of breakdown, meltdown scenario of literally me doing way too much, taking on way too many things, going into so many different topics, completely was ruining every aspect of my life. It was tearing me down in that way. And I want to ask you, James, what is it that has broken some of your habits? But I just want to take a quick second to take a break for one of our sponsors. So yeah, what is the thing that you find has broken some of your your habits or some of your flow that you try and kind of get into every single day? What are some of the kryptonites that you might have? What is your Achilles heel when it comes to your productivity? And how do you get over that? Because it's very easy to say what we should do every day. And I know that I should do this every day, but I don't. And there's days where it doesn't work out. So, dive in a little bit to that. How do we recover from some of these situations?
I think there are multiple things that can derail you, but I'll pick 2 or 3. So first, I think is the focus. It's a mindset issue. It's a focus on chasing a particular performance or appearance or result or goal rather than chasing a new identity. And here's what I mean. So often when we're setting goals for ourselves or we're thinking about what we want to achieve, we focus on, and you could imagine this kind of like an onion, okay, or like concentric circles. So on the outer layer, you have like your appearance or the result that you get. So let's take weight loss since that's a common one and everybody can understand it. So on the outer layer, it might be something like, oh, you lost 20 pounds. Okay, so that's the appearance-based goal. On the next layer on the middle layer, this is your behavior or your actions, okay? So this is like the performance. So on the outer layer, it's you lost 20 pounds. On the next layer your performance, it's something like you can do 15 push-ups in a row or 50 push-ups in a row, whatever it is, okay? So on the next layer it's performance-based. And this is often where we focus when we think about, okay, I have a goal. Let me think about the performance I want to achieve, right? I want to lose 30 pounds in the next 6 months. I need to work out 45 minutes a day for 3 times a week. Like that's so we do appearance performance. On the middle, at the core of behavior change, is your identity. And this is what you believe about yourself, the type of person that you see that you are. The key when behavior change or when a new habit becomes routine for you is when it matches your identity. It's when it's no longer a change because it's just an expression of the type of person that you are.
And it's
So
literally
for example,
just like something that you would do like anything else that you would have
yeah, it's
normally
not
done
change.
anyway.
It's just your normal lifestyle, right? So like for me, I lift every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I know I'm going to go to the gym today. It's not like a stretch for me. It's just what I do, right? It's just part of my identity. The key is that so there's nothing wrong with setting big goals for yourself, having great dreams, thinking about where you want to go. I think it's great to have that as a directional point, right? As a compass that points you in a certain direction. But when it comes to implementation, this is when I think we need to shift our focus from the appearance or the performance to the identity. So what I mean is, if you want to lose 20 pounds in the next 4 months, often people will say, okay, I need to work out, like I said, 45 minutes a day, 3 times a week, all this type of stuff, right? They focus on what they need to do. But if you take it from an identity-based perspective, an identity-based habit, you would say, okay, who is the type of person that could lose 20 pounds in the next 4 months? Well, it's the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. So then you just focus on building the identity of becoming the type of person who doesn't miss workouts, not on the performance at all. It doesn't even matter how long you stay at the gym in the beginning. It's just become the type of person who works out consistently. So one example, I have a reader who ended up losing over 100 pounds over the course of a year or two. Wow. When he added exercise into his routine, he told himself, I'm not allowed to go to the gym for more than 5 minutes. I can go for 5 minutes, but when it gets to 6 minutes, I have to leave. And so he did this for like 5 weeks. And then eventually
that must have been so weird.
He was like, I'm coming here all the time. I kind of feel like staying longer, which is the exact opposite of how most people feel, right? Most people are like, I got to lose weight. I need to get my act together. I need to go to the gym and bust my butt. And they work until they're exhausted for an hour. And they do that 2-3 times a week. And they stick with it for 2 or 3 weeks. And then they burn out. And he's like, no, I'm focusing on the behavior first, not the result. And that idea of figure out what is the type of behavior that will drive the identity that you want, focus on that to begin with, not the result.
Wow, that is an incredible story. That takes some serious guts to go to the gym and watch and look at the person's face who watches you walk in and out, like, 5 minutes later, it's like for like weeks on weeks. That takes some serious cojones. That's I love
Nothing
that,
else
though.
matters if you don't do the behavior, right?
No, you're totally
right.
100% right.
And so this leads me into the second story, which I think is important for this. And that is that when we set goals for ourselves, we often set a lower limit. So the story that I'll tell is about Southwest Airlines. They grew for decade upon decade. Okay, they did really well all the way into the 90s when many airline companies were losing money or going bankrupt. Southwest was still posting a profit each year. In 1996, they had an offer to expand service to over 100 cities in the U.S. This is a great problem to have for your business. Most businesses are like, yes, let's grow as fast as possible. Let's take advantage of the market while we have it. Let's make sure we do this. Southwest turned down over 95% of the offers they received that year and expanded to 4 new cities. And the reason that they did this, Jim Collins talks about this in his book, Great by Choice. One of the reasons that they did this is they were picking a pace that they could sustain. Right. And this, I think, is very important when it comes to building new habits or focusing on consistency and maintaining that over the long run. We often pick these lower limits for ourselves. Like, I want to lose at least 20 pounds. I want to write for at least an hour today. We want to improve quarterly revenue by at least $1 million. And the assumption is if you can do more than that, then go ahead and do it. Right. But the problem is when you are always chasing that, you end up burning yourself out many times. Meanwhile, you could set an upper limit for your progress. I'm going to write at least 500 words today, but not more than 1,000. Or if you're a basketball player, I'm going to shoot at least 25 free throws today, but not more than 50. Or we're going to focus on increasing revenue by at least $10,000 this month, but not more than 50. Whatever it is, right? Like you pick the number for you. And that way you focus on the sustainable level of growth that you can actually keep consistent with over the long run rather than, chasing things that are going to burn you out.
That is brilliant. That is super smart to set an upper limit. And I've never even thought about it in that way, which is like, And that's a problem that, again, I had, is that I was achieving so much. Like, I was getting so much done, doing all these crazy things, but I never really I never really thought, what is my upper limit? And, for the people who listen to this kind of podcast, sustainability, if you want to see, the word sustainability is more so than just, solar panels and eco-construction and permaculture and gardening and all that stuff. It's not just that. To me, sustainability is long-term thinking, right? And if you think long-term and you're running a race, like let's say your life is like a race, well, guess what? It's a long race. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if you're going to sprint your way through everything, you're going to find yourself constantly tired every couple of a couple of paces. You're going to run a little bit, be tired, and then you're going to be out of commission. And it's really one of these scenarios of like the rabbit and the tortoise, right?
The basic idea is that recovery is non-negotiable. You don't get to decide that you are or aren't going to recover, because if you did, everybody would just decide we don't need time off. We'll just keep working.
Go.
Right? Like, it's not you don't get to choose. It's going to catch up to you one way or another. So either you make small progress every day, or you try to do as much as humanly possible in one day, and then you're forced to take 3, 5, 10 days off to recover, whatever it is. For me, for writing, I had someone tell me, oh, you should write 5 days a week, right? Like, generally speaking, more content is better, assuming the quality is the same. So you should do that. Well, yeah. I tried that for a month on a different site before I started jamesco.com. I completely burnt out. I couldn't maintain it. Monday, Thursday, that's a pace that I can keep. I can produce at a high quality, and then I give myself 2 days off, and then I do it again. I give myself 3 days off, and then I do it again, and that pace is something I can sustain. So it's like, figure out what that medium is for you, where you're doing the work or you're committing to the thing often enough to get a result and to move forward, but you're giving yourself enough time off to balance and recover so that you can put your best energy into it again the next time around.
Absolutely. Recovery is, it's fundamental. You have to do it. I tried to do everything to not do it. I went literally to the extremes personally, trying different sleep cycles. I don't know if you've ever heard of things like the Everyman or
polyphasic
sleeps. Exactly. Yeah. Polyphasic sleep cycles. I've tried all kinds of different things just to test my body. So it wasn't always about efficiency, but I'm definitely addicted to efficiency, and but I'm less so now, and I'm getting a little bit better at it. But the idea of like constantly trying to push your boundaries really is, even if you're able to do it, you're going to do it at the expense of something else. You're going to do it at the expense of your health or your relationship with the people you love. You're going to do it at the expense of something else in your life. If you're burning the candle at both ends of the stick, you're going to be in a situation that it's going to start hurting, and you're going to start to feel it. You're going to start to break down. And as you break down, it's, I'd rather have a car that I buy that lasts me a long time, that I can drive for many, 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 kilometers and miles or whatever, as opposed to one that I constantly am zooming to and from everywhere I go. I'm consuming way more gas, which way more of my energy and time and money. And the car's just going to break down on me significantly faster than if I was just maintaining a much better pace for myself. And a lot of that also comes at the expense of awareness and of presence in our own lives. I was reading about this statistic about the shocking number of Americans who do not even take their 2 weeks vacation every year, who do not even take the time to take time off, period. Like, literally paid vacations. They don't even take the time. Oh, sorry, I don't have the time to do that. It's like, really? You don't have the time to take off your paid vacation? Why are you working exactly? What is that motivation? What is that core as to why you feel that you have to be so busy? Is it, a lot of people I feel tend to defer it directly to the devil of money. It's like, oh, it's because I don't have enough money, or I need to make more money. And it's like, they can easily kind of push that off and say that. But I don't think that's always true. I think there's always a way that you can always find a way if you wanted it, right? And how do you make sure to do that? How do you make sure to like what do you do in your recovery, for example? I know you do photography. Like, what do you spend your time doing that gets you away and that actually maybe leads to the inspiration of what you're going to write in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah. So every December I take a 3 week sabbatical, which I just take off for, for holidays and everything. So that's like a time when I usually don't publish anything. And there's maybe if I have some articles stored up, I would send one out. But usually it's just I give everybody that time off so they don't get any emails from me or anything. Last year I also took a full month sabbatical in June, which I was fine, but it actually was too long for me without writing.
Mm,
And the what I found actually works better is most people's jobs don't fall in this category, but I'm fortunate that mine does because I've designed it or created it. So what I'm about to say is it's better if you never have to take a sabbatical and or never have to take significant time off for vacation. And what I mean is it's better if your week by week pace makes you happy and doesn't burn you into the ground and you have time each week to do the stuff you want, right?
mm,
And that's kind of what I'm trying to get to is how do I do focused work for 4 or 5 hours in the morning and then have the afternoons and evenings off? And off for me usually doesn't mean, and by the way, that's an ideal schedule.
of course.
There's many times where I don't stick to that, but off for me doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing that relates to work. Like off means I'm not answering email or I'm not working on a presentation or something like that, right? Maybe I'm not even actively writing an article, but I could be reading a book that will inspire a future article or
Of
something like
course.
that.
Yeah.
Or I could be at a dinner with friends that may, maybe that are somewhat work related, stuff like that. But um, as far as where the inspiration comes, I have found that if I spend all my time working or doing output focused things, my quality of work actually decreases. I need some kind of input. It just can't be flowing out of me because then I don't have anything providing inspiration or anything fueling. It's like it'd be like just trying to run a car engine but never fueling up again. It's like at some point you could keep the car moving, but you got to get out and push it yourself. And like there's, or you could just stop at each gas station and refuel every now and then, like a reasonable person, right?
Mm,
And I had this struggle last year where my articles were kind of falling flat, or at least I thought they were. And I realized one of the problems was that I wasn't reading as much. So I need that input so that I can, develop and let ideas formulate and grow. So I would say that that's kind of my general philosophy is how can I build an ideal lifestyle that doesn't wear me out each week, that allows me proper recovery day in and day out.
mm.
And easily the most essential thing for me is lifting. If I go to the gym and I work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that keeps me centered. If I did not work out, I don't think that I would be an entrepreneur.
Wow.
I think that the ups and downs, the roller coaster ride of entrepreneurship, and just the stress of having to build a business and like always be in this zone of uncertainty where you're not sure, you're always pushing yourself to that next level to try to figure
Constant.
something else new. That probably would have run me into the ground by now if I wasn't able to recenter myself every day or so, every other day at the gym.
Wow. Okay. So lifting is an important thing. I agree with. I love the idea of like, you don't have to batch your vacation. Specifically if you have the luxury to do such, try and take days off periodically. Try and take moments off daily. Trying and kind of schedule in fun consistently. And that's kind of what I've been doing. And I feel that like literally today, I should have been working on something, and right before this call, I guess, and I decided I was like, you know what, I'm taking 2 hours off and I'm listening to a podcast.
Mm.
And that's just what I was gonna do. And it didn't, and I was like, I should be doing something else, but I'm listening to a podcast. And there's nothing that I can do about it because I know that I have to get some of this inspiration from other people. And like you said, I can't just be putting everything out and not expect that, I'm going to need something in, that I'm going to need to ingest some of this, even if it's just information, even if it's just for work, like for being inspiring. Sometimes you have to listen to other people who are also inspiring and doing well, you know?
Mm.
So I think that's an important topic, which is that every superhero in my mind has a mentor, has people who are there for them, that help them, that guide them. And sometimes that mentor for me is in the form of podcasts as well. It doesn't have to be a physical person that I even speak to. It just can be something that I listen to. But what are some of the books that you find have just been absolutely transformational, or maybe, I don't know, a documentary that you've watched or people that you've spoken to, just frames of mind that have just completely changed everything for you?
Yeah. So I've been reading a lot more for me recently. I'm reading at a faster pace than I had in the past. Usually I finish about 30 to 40 books a year, but what I'm starting to find is I'm reading more books is because I made that shift to reading books rather than blogs and stuff last year because I felt like I was reading too many things that were being I was doing in reactive reading mode. If a link got
Mm,
shared online or a link got shared on Twitter or Facebook, I would read it, but I wasn't in proactive reading mode where I said, "This
yep.
is what I need to read right now. Let me go
Mm-hmm.
out and read this book."
Mm-hmm.
Um, so anyway, what I'm finding as I'm reading more and more books is that great books are great if you read them at the right time. So like I just read The Art of Profitability and I thought that book was awesome, but it's only awesome for me because it's at a perfect time in my business,
Mm-hmm.
like that it fits the context I'm in. So I'll give some suggestions based on different places where people may find themselves. Um, let's see. The first one is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Amazing.
Book is great if you're struggling to create a project.
Yeah,
You're starting to get something done, you're struggling with consistency, you're struggling with trying to be, put your work into the world. That's a great book to read.
absolutely.
Um,
Read it actually fairly recently, not at the beginning of my career, but read it fairly recently, and I thought it was very transformational.
if you're looking for a book that is just a fantastic read, like just awesome, whether you want to study the craft of writing or you just want to escape from business for a little bit and read a crazy story about adventure, um, Into Thin Air by John Krakauer is an awesome read. It's about the team that went on. It was about basically the greatest disaster that ever happened on Mount Everest.
Wow.
And let's see if I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman is one of my favorite books of all time. Richard Feynman was a famous physicist. This is basically an autobiography from him or just a collection of crazy stories that happened in his life. But he, in addition to being a Nobel Prize winning physicist, he knew how to crack safes. He worked on the atomic bomb project. He
Wow.
played bongos in Brazil. He did all kinds of crazy stuff. So
Awesome.
that one's great. A book that inspired me for my writing, because I try to base a lot of my writing in research. So, like I mentioned, a study earlier today that was published in Journal of Information Management. A lot of my articles, I try to back up with some type of science. Um, the Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. This book, the subtitle is a biography of cancer, and it's about cancer and how we come to know what we do about it and how we treat it today in medicine and everything. But it's it's a big book. It's like 500 pages long, but the last 120 pages are a selected bibliography of resources that he looked at. So
Wow.
one out of every 5 pages in this book is dedicated just to the resources that he looked at. I don't know. It's an incredible research effort. I think it took him like 7 years to write that book.
That's
Uh,
amazing. Where you
yeah,
know
I
that,
when I read stuff like that, it makes me want to raise the level of my work because you look at
through
that,
research.
like, yeah, well, it just makes me like another great book, and I'm a sucker for health books, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show. I worked in medical practice, but um, Complications by Atul Gawande is one of my favorite books as well. And he's a physician, he's a surgeon. But when I read that book, the first thought I had after I got done was, yeah, that was a great book, but I want to create something that good someday. Like I
Mm.
want to like it's not just a good read, it's a work of art in some ways, like being able to tell stories that people gravitate toward and that hook them in. That's something I want to be able to do with my weekly articles. So anyway, those are a couple of pieces that inspire me, a couple good reads in general, and something to read if you're struggling to get your own work done.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are some great suggestions. I mean, I haven't read them all, but I actually heard of the Into Thin Air kind of story and the whole disaster on Everest. I've also heard of, I've read about the one that happened on K2 and also all these different other mountains and stuff. War of Art, man, definitely. Um, there are a lot of places that you can find inspiration as a listener or whoever's listening to this. And just know that you need to kind of constantly tap into that and go to that well from time to time and drink from that well, because you need to make sure that you're hydrated with these kinds of information. If you want to be inspiring, you have to go and absorb some of the things that you couldn't possibly learn on your own, right? And I find the element of research pretty profound. A lot of us just use Google, or we research based on, and you mentioned something very, very important. I really want to bring that up again real quick, which is not just reactive digestion of what we're seeing, right, on Facebook or whatever is being sent to us via email or whatever it is, but proactive. What is it that you have been longing to learn, longing to dive into, longing to to expand your knowing of. And do it. Take the time to do it, because it's going to empower you. It's going to enrich you. And for those of you who don't know what you want to do next, or who don't know what your next idea is or where to start, the truth is just start somewhere, right? The truth is dive into something, and that is going to empower you. You know, I learned photography and videography. It's not something that I knew I was going to do. It's never something I would even planned on doing, but it did empower me. And it's not something I do even now today, you know, but I have done it for other people, and I do it now as a passion and for fun. But I have used it, however, in building websites and in building some of the things that, you know, I currently do today. So whatever you're going to do is going to empower you and level you up, right? And if you're a superhero or you want to be a superhero, well, guess what? Acquiring those different superpowers is super important. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I want to give you one last chance to maybe, you know, let people know where they can learn more about how to change your habits and learn more about the psychology of this kind of stuff. Where can they get more information? Where can they go and subscribe? Where can you know, they stay connected to you?
Sure. So jamesclear.com is probably the best place to go if you just want to check things out, take a look at a couple of articles that I've written and some of the work that I've done. Specifically on habits, if you're looking for more information about that, I put together a 45-page guide, just a quick PDF download that covers not only some of the science of habit formation, but some quick exercises you can use for building better habits. And you can download that. It's called Transform Your Habits. You can download it at jamesclear.com/habits.
Yeah. Links
so
in the
feel free to
description,
take a look at that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for shedding your wisdom. Thank you so much for doing what you do and doing it with that depth and with that consistency and that focus, because I really have to admire that. You know, it's not every day that you come across an entrepreneur who is that as focused as you are and is really putting out some high quality stuff like you are. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. It's great to be on the show, Mark.
All right.